Hello. David's like us. He may be the man after God's own heart, but his life is full of ups and downs. At times when he's really, really good, and then he has those down moments. Today, we're going to see David at his absolute best. 2 Samuel chapter 9 tells a great story. Actually, it's a two-part story. Today, we're going to look at it from David's perspective. Next week, we're going to see it, the same story, from an entirely different perspective, from that of Mephibosheth. Well, it starts out when David remembers the covenant. Back in chapter 7 of 2 Samuel, God made a covenant with David. He promised him that his family, his seed, would go on and endure forever. The kingdom would last forever. The throne would last forever. And he gave David great favor. David has gone through a time that he has conquered the enemies all around him. And he has been living in this. But now, for a little while, Israel is at rest. And David is having one of those quiet, reflective days, I think. And he remembers Jonathan, his soulmate, the one that he went through so much with. They went through adversity. They stood together. And no matter what, Jonathan was loyal to him. He did not allow the injuries and the hurts from Saul to stop him or his love for Jonathan. And Jonathan stood up for David, even to the point that he was almost killed by his own father when Saul threw that spear at him. And the love that these two had caused him to make a promise, to make a covenant with David. And so David promised that he would look after Jonathan's family. And 1 Samuel, we've got to go back to really see the covenant. In chapter 20, verses 14 through 16, Jonathan is saying, "And you shall not only show me the kindness of the Lord while I still live, that I may not die, but you shall not cut off your kindness from my house forever. No, not when the Lord has cut off your enemies from the face of the earth." So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David. Their covenant was made before Jonathan's death, but it was never, ever forgotten. David promised that he would protect the seed of Jonathan no matter what, and he vowed that he would not wipe out the house of Saul. He could not ignore the promise of Jonathan, even though Jonathan was no longer living. His heart just wouldn't let him do that. And part of the reason is Jonathan had faith in David. Jonathan gave him the courage to go on because he said, "You're going to be king after me. You're going to survive. God is going to take care of you. God will wipe away all of your enemies." Maybe Jonathan did this because he believed the prophecies that Samuel had spoken over him in his youth that he would be king. Maybe he did it because he saw God's hand of protection upon him. Maybe he did it because he saw God's grace. And he knew that his father was not one who followed wholly after the Lord, but he knew that David in his heart was a man who followed God all the way. Whatever the reason, Jonathan believed in David. And this faith that Jonathan had in David caused David to believe in himself even more. And it caused him to have a stronger faith in God. Isn't it great to have a friend like that? All of us need someone that's going to stand with us and for us in our time of adversity, in our time of darkness. And so it was because of this that even though they still belonged to Saul's house, he could honor them. Now, you might say, well, that would be no big deal, except we have to look back at the history of the day. Back in ancient times, if you were to be crowned king, and the bloodline of the previous king did not match your bloodline. The only thing for the new king to do was to go in and to kill all of the former king's relatives. Many times it was not only the relatives that were killed, but anyone that actually served with him. And so any person taking the throne would be expected, and it would be accepted if he went through and killed all of the heir apparents of the throne, anyone who had any possible claim to the throne. But that wasn't the case with David. Part of the reason was David did not take the throne. It was given to him by the people of Israel. And all of that was God's plan. And so according to God's plan and according to the promise that David had made to Jonathan, he starts out on a search. He knew that God had been good to him, and he wanted to share that goodness and blessings with others. So he initiated a search. And in 2 Samuel chapter 9, verses 1 through 5, gives us the outline of this. David said, "Is there still not anyone left of the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" Well, that search resulted in finding a man by the name of Ziba. Now, Ziba had been a servant in the household of Saul, and he's still around, and by some means during these past few years, he's become wealthy. I mean, he has 15 sons and 20 servants, and he's probably living off of the wealth of Saul. So he said to them, to Ziba now, he said, "Is there not someone that I can show kindness to?" After he appears to him, and he says, "Well, yes, there is still a son of Jonathan who is lame in his feet." Now, not only was this a member of Saul's household, this was an actual son of Jonathan. Can you imagine the joy that David felt to realize that this was an opportunity for him to really show his love, his appreciation, and to honor the memory of his friend? And so who he lets him know is that this one, he's lame in his feet, and he's a grandson of him, and his name is Mephibosheth. He's the grandson of Saul, the son of Jonathan, and also the nephew of Ishbosheth, who was that short-lived but second king of Saul's clan of Israel. When Mephibosheth was only 5 years old, word came to his nurse that his father and his grandfather had been killed in battle at Mount Gilboa. She was terrified, and she took off, and running away with the young prince, she tripped, fell, and somehow Mephibosheth fell as well. And when he did, he was lamed for life. And he was living in charge with her. Now he was at a place that he should have been an outcast. He should have been ignored by society. But because of his parents, because of his lineage, he was hidden away. And so King David says, "Well, where is he?" And Ziba said to him, "Well, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, in Lodabar." Now, those are a lot of words and a lot of names that we aren't even able to identify on the map today. But this was a place on the other side of Jordan. And so Lodabar is a place that means pastureless. There's no bread there. And so he was living Mephibosheth was living in Mecca, a man that means sold to tumble and to ruins and to perish. He was a man without hope. He was a man who was in shame. Because you see, Mephibosheth, while he went there at age 5, he's now grown to be a man, married, has a son by the name of Micah. Oh, David hears about where he is, what he's like, how long it's been. What does he say? He says, go and get him. Go and bring him here. What grace. David showed amazing grace. Verses 6-8 says, now when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, had come to David, he fell down on his face and prostrated himself. David said to Mephibosheth, Mephibosheth? And he answered, here is your servant. Mephibosheth received grace because of a covenant. It had been 15 years since his father died. And during those years, he had no idea of what was available to him. And so he lived a life of fear because he was a relative of Saul, a relative of Jonathan, and most assuredly, he thought, an enemy of the new King David. But he did not know about the covenant. He did not know what was available to him. He did not know David's heart. David had a heart to keep his word. He had nothing to fear from the king, and he had also nothing to offer. And as he fell down before the king and said, behold, I am your servant, David's heart went out to him. And he said, don't fear. Do not fear. Can you imagine Mephibosheth hearing those words? Do not fear. How can you tell me not to fear? You're the king. You're the enemy. You're the reason my father and my grandfather's dead. And I know you called me here only to destroy their memory. But the words of David are just so much different than what he ever thought. David says, I'm showing kindness to you because of your father Jonathan. I want to honor him. I loved your father. I loved him just like I love my own soul. And nothing that you have ever done and nothing that you could ever do will ever change the fact that I made a promise to him. And the promise that I made to him was that I will care for you. And David said, no matter what happens, I want to do that. And he says, I'm going to give you back everything that your grandfather had. I am going to give you a place at my table. I am going to look at you just as though I were looking at your father Jonathan, and you are just like royalty to me. Mephibosheth didn't know what to say. To have such honor, to have such favor, that was not anything that he could have anticipated or even dreamed about. And he says, how can you do this? Who am I, your servant, that you should show regard for me, for I'm nothing but a dead dog. Remember back in 1 Samuel when David and Saul had one of their last encounters? And David said to King Saul, he says, why are you running after me? I am nothing but a dead dog. And now, years later, the grandson of King Saul comes to him and says, Why should you show such favor to me? I am nothing but a dead dog. The roles are reversed. The families are reversed. But David's heart remains pure. And he sees in Mephibosheth, even though he's broken and lame, he sees his dear friend Jonathan. And he has his servants pick him up, take him to the table where he's seated. And on that massive table, as he scooted under with his chair, his lameness is hidden. No one can see that. Then David, I can just picture him standing up and making this statement to that dining hall filled with people. And as he stood by the table, he said, "From this day forward, let it be known that Mephibosheth and his family, his little son Micah, will no longer be known as an enemy of the kingdom, but they are part of my royal family for Jonathan's sake." David said, I know who he is, and I know how he should be treated. But because of the covenant, this is how I see him, and this is how I will treat him. Never in any other place does David show such a heart for God that he's willing to reach out to the outcast, to those who are lost, to those who are hurt, and says, I love you, I see you, I accept you, but I'm going to bring you up and I am going to bring you out. And then he says, I want to do more. I want to give you a future. I want to give you a hope. And so he calls for Ziba, that servant, and he speaks to him of the future and hope that he's given to Mephibosheth. And he tells Ziba, he says, I have given to your master's son, because David recognizes that Ziba still looks on Saul as being his real master, even though David is king. He says, I've given to your master all that belongs to Saul and to all of his house. You and your sons and your servants shall work the land for him, and you shall bring in the harvest that your master's son may have food to eat. He said, I want you to take care of him. I want you to be the one that cares for him. You took care of Saul and his household. Now I'm going to allow you to take care of his grandson. By doing this, by putting Saul's servant Ziba into employment, he also cared for Saul's household in a different way. And he said, this is what's going to happen to you and how you're going to be blessed. But Mephibosheth, your master's son, he shall eat at my table always. He says, you're going to work the land, you're going to take care of him, but he's not going to be with you. You do the work and bring the harvest in and give him the profits. And all this time, he's going to be with me. He's going to be right here in the palace. He's going to be here in Jerusalem. I am going to care for him as my own. And Ziba, his 15 sons, his 20 servants, and all their families, they moved to Gibeah to care for the lands belonging to Mephibosheth. But that's not all. David went on. He had more for Mephibosheth. He said, as for Mephibosheth, he will eat at my table. Yeah, we've heard that 3 times already. But he makes this little addition that's really great. He said, he shall eat at my table like one of the king's son. He says, he's royalty. He is going to be like a son to me. Just like his father David took me in, I am going to take his son in, and I am going to love him. Mephibosheth had a son whose name was Micah. And I know that he cared for him as well. And the chapter ends by saying, so Mephibosheth dwelt in Jerusalem, for he ate continually at the king's table, and he was lame in both feet. David saw that. He knew that his lameness could never be repaired. They didn't have the doctors back then that could perform the surgeries, or maybe it was something that even if medical technology had been available, maybe it still could not be healed. But David said, it doesn't matter. It does not matter. David arranged for his care. He would never want again. David's promise to Jonathan continued throughout his entire life, and it also included his son. Jonathan's grandson, even Saul's great-grandson. Jonathan treated Mephibosheth just like he was an adopted son and a member of royalty. Mephibosheth's shame was removed, and David made a promise to that humble and weak Mephibosheth that he would not be crushed by the powerful. Instead, he was going to rest secure. He was going to be at home and sit at the table in a kingdom that had power and peace. Now, David wasn't expecting anything from Mephibosheth. He only wanted him to receive his kindness and sit at his table with him. He was giving him a new identity. He was the son, not identified by disability or ability, but only by grace and favor of the king. What a wonderful thing that David did. What a picture we have of Jesus as Jesus looks at us. And he doesn't look at our abilities or our disabilities, but he shows us his grace. And he says, I want you to be my child. I want to adopt you into my family. I want you to know that it's nothing, has absolutely nothing to do with you. You see, the Father made a covenant. And the covenant was that whosoever believed in what Jesus did, they could become part of his family. Just like Mephibosheth, all he had to do, all David wanted him to do, was to believe this and to accept what was given to him. And that's all God wants us to do. He wants us to just accept everything that the Father has given. David made 3 promises because of his covenant with Jonathan, and that was to show unmerited favor to Mephibosheth. God shows us his unmerited favor. We don't deserve a thing, but God gives it to us day by day. The second promise was to restore all the land that Saul had lost. God comes in when we become his child, and he says, because of sin, you lost so much. There's so much that you've lost through the years. He said, but I will restore to you everything that's been lost, broken, stolen, because you're my child. And then the third promise was to treat him like his own son, including him and his family and allowing him to eat at his table. Well, we can identify with that. We accept Jesus. We're part of God's family. We get to enjoy every blessing of the kingdom. We go through, we spend time with him and read the Bible and find the promises. We claim them, we walk in them, they are ours. All of these were unconditional promises that David made to Mephibosheth. He didn't ask for them. They all came out of the goodness of David's heart. We don't ask for, we don't deserve any blessings that God gives us, they all come out of the goodness of his heart. And so like Mephibosheth, will you accept the covenant? Will you become a covenant child? It's easy for you. All you have to do is say, yes. I know. I had this disability. Mephibosheth was lame. We're sinners. But I want to become God's family. I believe what Jesus did, and I want to receive grace. If you believe that, and if you want to see a change in your heart, let us know here at Evangel. We'd love to pray for you, and if possible, we'd even love to meet you. We meet every Sunday morning, 10 a.m., 2360 Hardy Road. We would love to hear about the change that God is making in your heart because you have become a child of the covenant.